There are secrets that kill. And my husband carried one so heavy that his heart couldn't take it when the past showed up right in front of us. My name is Margaret. I'm 78 years old, and for 20 years of my life, I slept next to a man I thought I knew. But the truth, my dears, the truth was so cruel that when it finally reached me, I cried for days on end. I cried for the wasted time, for the lies, and especially for an innocent girl who never had the chance to know her own father. Before I continue telling this story that changed my life forever, I ask from the bottom of my heart that you hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading each message from you. It gives me strength to keep sharing these stories. Now, yes, I'll start from the beginning, from the exact day everything started to crumble, even though I didn't know it yet. It was a Saturday in March 1973. I was 31 years old and had been married to Gerald for 8 years. 8 years that I considered blessed, happy, peaceful. We lived in a simple house in Forest Hills, Queens, New York. Nothing fancy, but it was our little corner, you know? Gerald worked as an accountant at an office in Manhattan. He'd leave every day at 6 in the morning in a suit and tie. He'd come back at 6 in the evening. A punctual man, hard-working, respected at work. I stayed home taking care of our 2 children. Paul was 6 years old, Rita was 4. 2 rambunctious kids, full of energy, who filled our house with joy. I spent my days between pots and pans, laundry, ironing, and that pleasant chaos of a mother who doesn't stop for a minute. But I was happy, or at least I thought I was. Gerald was a quiet man, a man of few words. He wasn't one of those affectionate husbands who's always giving compliments or bringing flowers to his wife. No. He was serious, kind of closed off, but I never suspected anything. I thought that was just his way. He fulfilled his household obligations, brought home the paycheck at the end of the month, didn't drink, didn't gamble, gave no reason for suspicion. For me, that was more than enough. Back then, we didn't expect much romance, my dear. We expected respect, responsibility, and for the man to provide for the house. And in that, Gerald was impeccable. He was 40 years old in 1973. A handsome man, I must say, tall, black hair, always combed with pomade, well-trimmed mustache. He wore black-framed glasses, those square glasses everyone wore back then. He had a serious air, like a trustworthy person. The neighbors would always comment, "Margaret, how lucky you are to have such a responsible husband, so proper." And I agreed full of pride, but there was one thing about him that always intrigued me a little, you know? He never, but never ever, talked about his family. He said his parents had died when he was young, that he had no siblings, that he'd grown up alone. When we got married in 1965, there was no one from his family at the wedding. Just my parents, my siblings, my aunts and uncles. His side was empty. I thought it was strange, but he always changed the subject when I asked. He said it was too painful to talk about the past, that he preferred to look forward to our family. And I, foolishly, accepted it. Today, I know I should have insisted more. He also didn't have any old photos of himself, none, not from childhood, not from adolescence. He said he'd lost everything in a fire at the boarding house where he lived before meeting me. And I believed him. I believed everything. That Saturday in March, we had planned to go to the farmer's market in the morning. It was our custom. Every Saturday, early in the morning, we'd go to the neighborhood market to buy vegetables, fruit, meat for Sunday. The kids would stay with my mother, and those 2 hours at the market were almost like an outing for me. It was the moment when I'd leave the house, chat with the vendors, see different people. I remember waking up early that day, making coffee, getting the kids ready, and taking them to my mother's house, which was 3 blocks from our house. I came back. Gerald was already ready, in dress pants and a white shirt, long sleeves. He was one of those who never left the house in casual clothes, not even on weekends, always well-dressed. The market was a delight, stalls of tomatoes, lettuce, bananas, oranges, the smell of fresh fish mixed with the smell of fried food, people shouting, offering merchandise. "Look at the bananas, ma'am. £3 for $1. We walked slowly. I was choosing things, putting them in the market bag. Gerald walked beside me, quiet as always, carrying the heavier bag. We bought everything we needed: tomatoes, potatoes, onions, lettuce, cabbage, bananas, oranges, a whole chicken for Sunday lunch. We spent almost everything he'd set aside for that week's shopping. When we finished, it was almost noon. The sun was strong, that March heat in New York that's neither winter nor spring but burns all the same. We were heading back home, walking along Queens Boulevard. I was chattering, talking nonsense, commenting that the bananas had gotten more expensive, that the vegetable vendor had been nice. Gerald walked quietly, just listening, as always. Suddenly, he stopped. He stopped right in the middle of the sidewalk like that, all of a sudden. The bag he was carrying almost fell from his hand. I stopped too, looked at him, thought he'd forgotten something at the market. "Gerald, did you forget something?" He didn't answer. He was staring straight ahead, to the other side of the street, staring with an expression I'd never seen on his face, a mixture of fear, astonishment, panic, eyes wide behind his glasses, mouth half open. White, my dear. He turned white as a sheet. I followed his gaze, tried to see what he was seeing. On the other side of the street there was a woman in her mid-40s, thin, brunette, hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a light blue dress with white polka dots. She was standing still too, looking at us, or rather, looking at him. And she also had a strange expression on her face, surprised, scared. "Gerald," I called again, touching his arm. He started to sweat. I saw the sweat running down his forehead, down the side of his face. He started breathing fast, panting. He put his hand to his chest. "Gerald, what's wrong? Do you know that woman?" He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Just a moan, his hand pressing his chest, crumpling his white shirt, his eyes still fixed on the woman across the street. She didn't move either. She stood still, looking with her hand over her mouth as if she'd seen a ghost. And then Gerald staggered. "Gerald!" I screamed, dropping my bag, trying to hold him, but he was much heavier than me. He fell to his knees on the sidewalk, his hand still on his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Help me! Someone help me!" I started screaming desperately. People on the street started to approach. A man came running, helped lay Gerald on the ground, loosened his tie. "Looks like a heart attack," the man said. "Someone call an ambulance." I was kneeling beside him, holding his hand, crying. "Gerald, hang on, my love. The ambulance is coming." He opened his eyes, looked at me. He was so pale, so weak. He squeezed my hand with a strength I didn't know he still had, and then whispered softly. I could barely hear with all that noise of people around. "The girl, Margaret, the girl was right about me." "What girl, Gerald? What girl? What are you talking about?" He closed his eyes, lost consciousness. I looked to the other side of the street, looking for the woman in the blue dress. She had disappeared. She had left. I didn't even know who she was. Couldn't even see her face properly with all that confusion. I only remember the blue dress with white polka dots. The ambulance took forever, what seemed like hours, but probably was about 15 minutes. It arrived with the siren blaring. 2 paramedics jumped out running, put Gerald on a stretcher, stuck an oxygen mask on his face, and loaded him into the ambulance. I climbed in with them, still not understanding anything, in shock. On the way to the hospital, I kept looking at him, unconscious, hooked up to those machines, and I couldn't stop thinking, what girl was right about him? And who was that woman in the blue dress? They admitted him to the hospital, took him straight to the emergency room. I stayed in the waiting room, alone, trembling, praying. I prayed all the prayers I knew. Hail Mary, our Father, even the prayer I'd learned from my grandmother and never prayed again. I stayed there for hours alone. I hadn't even told my mother yet, hadn't even thought about the kids. I was in complete shock. A doctor came to talk to me. It was already about 5 in the afternoon. A young man in a white coat, stethoscope around his neck. "Are you Mr. Gerald's wife?" I am, doctor. How is he? He had an acute myocardial infarction, a severe heart attack. We managed to stabilize him, but he's very weak. He'll be hospitalized, probably a few days in the ICU. Will he be okay, doctor? We'll do our best, ma'am, but it was a serious heart attack. He'll need a lot of rest, care, and even when he leaves here, he can't have strong emotions, stress, and things like that. His heart has been quite fragile. I thanked him. The doctor left. I stayed there a while longer until they let me see him. He was in an ICU bed, unconscious, full of wires, machines beeping. He looked so fragile, so small in that bed. My husband, who had always been so strong, so secure. I went home in the early morning. I picked up the kids at my mother's house the next day. I tried to explain that Dad was sick, but was going to be okay. They were small, didn't really understand the seriousness. Gerald stayed 12 days in the hospital. When he woke up, on the third day, I asked about the woman in the blue dress. He said he didn't remember anything, that he didn't see any woman, that the last thing he remembered was being at the market with me. He said it must have been something he ate that made him sick, that caused the heart attack. But I knew it wasn't true. I had seen the way he looked at that woman, and she at him. I had seen the panic on his face. That wasn't food. It was fear. It was shock. It was recognition of something or someone he never wanted to see again in his life. And that phrase, the girl was right about me. What girl? Right about what? When he was discharged from the hospital in early April, the doctor gave a bunch of recommendations. Medications, diet with no salt and no fat, no exertion, no strong emotions. Gerald came home but didn't go back to work. He requested medical leave. He stayed home, in bed, most of the time. And I noticed changes in him. Strange changes. He became nervous, anxious. Any car noise on the street, he'd jump. If the doorbell rang, he'd get tense. He'd ask who it was before I opened the door. He started having nightmares. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, screaming things I didn't understand. I can't let you find me, he'd scream in his sleep. I can't. He bought a padlock and locked the drawer of his desk, where he kept his papers. He'd never done that before. One day I came home. I'd been at the store buying bread, and I caught him burning papers in the backyard. Old papers, yellowed. When I asked what it was, he said they were old documents, unimportant, that he was cleaning out. But the way he said it, nervous, hiding his hands that were shaking, wasn't normal. I tried to talk, tried to understand, but he wouldn't open up. He said everything was fine, that it was just the scare from the heart attack, that he was afraid of dying, and that's why he was acting strange. I wanted to believe him, but deep down I knew there was something more. In June, 3 months after the heart attack, he had a terrible anxiety attack. He was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper, when suddenly he started shaking all over, sweating cold, saying he was having another heart attack. I called the ambulance again. They took him to the hospital, but it wasn't a heart attack. It was panic, anxiety. The doctor medicated him, told him to see a psychiatrist. But back then, in 1973, men didn't go to psychiatrists. It was considered crazy people stuff, mentally ill. Gerald refused. He continued at home increasingly quiet, increasingly distant. The kids noticed. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy play with us anymore?" Paul would ask. And I didn't know what to answer. At the end of August, on a Monday morning, I woke up and Gerald wasn't in bed. I thought he'd gone to the bathroom, but he wasn't there. I went to the living room, the kitchen. He wasn't there. I went to the backyard. I found him collapsed near the laundry sink. "Gerald!" I ran to him. I turned him over. He was cold, ice cold, eyes open, empty, mouth half open. He had died alone in the middle of the night. Another heart attack. The doctor who came to certify the death said it was probably sudden, that he didn't even have time to call for help. My husband died at 42 years old, leaving me a widow at 31 with 2 small children. At the funeral, I looked around. Only my family, some neighbors, some colleagues from his office, no one from his family, because he had no family, or that's what he'd always said. That night, after the funeral, after putting the kids to bed, after receiving everyone's condolences, I sat on the bed that had been ours for 8 years and cried. I cried from sadness, from anger, from confusion, because I had absolute certainty that my husband had died with a secret so heavy it literally killed him. And I swore to myself that night that one day I would discover the truth, even if it took the rest of my life. I didn't know, my dears, that it would take exactly 20 years. 20 years until that woman in the blue dress knocked on my door and revealed who Gerald really was. And when she told me, I wished I'd never found out. After Gerald died, my life turned upside down. It wasn't just the pain of losing my husband, no. It was having to manage alone, with 2 children, no profession, no work experience, at a time when a widowed woman was practically forgotten by society. The pension I received was a pittance. The office where Gerald worked paid about 3 months' salary as compensation. Nothing more. Social Security gave me a pension that barely covered the rent. I had to hustle fast, because otherwise we were going to starve. I started doing sewing at home. My mother had taught me to sew when I was young. So I knew how to hem pants, sew on buttons, mend torn clothes. I spread the word in the neighborhood that I did repairs. At first, not much showed up. Pants here, a dress there, but word of mouth spread, and soon I had work every day. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, get the kids ready, take them to school, run back home, sit at the sewing machine and stay until it was time to pick them up. After they fell asleep, I'd go back to the machine and work until midnight, 1 in the morning. My fingers were always pricked by needles. My back hurt from being hunched over the machine, but that was the way. I had to survive. Paul and Rita grew up watching me work like crazy. They grew up without a father, without luxury, without anything beyond the basics. But I tried to give them affection, attention, even dead tired. On Sundays, which was the only day I rested a bit, we'd go to Mass in the morning, and in the afternoon I'd take them to the park. There was no money for movies, for ice cream shops, for those things, but the park was free. They'd play, run around, and I'd sit on a bench watching, thinking about life. And you know what I thought about? That day, that woman in the blue dress, those words. The girl was right about me. I couldn't get it out of my head. It was something that gnawed at me inside, like a bug eating away. About 2 months after the funeral, when I was already a bit more recovered from the shock, I decided to look for some clue. I started with the drawer he'd locked. I had to break the padlock with a screwdriver because he'd taken the key in his pocket and was buried with his clothes. When I opened it, I only found papers from his work. Old paychecks, receipts, some accounting notes, nothing personal, nothing that explained anything. I looked in his closet, in his clothes, in his pockets. I found 2 empty packs of Marlboro cigarettes, a broken comb, some coins, nothing more. I looked under the mattress, behind the furniture, inside the kitchen drawers. I even looked inside the pots, inside the food containers. Nothing. Gerald had cleaned any trace of his past or had never brought anything into the house. I even went to the office where he worked to talk to his boss. Mr. Manuel, a short, pot-bellied Portuguese man, received me politely. "Mrs. Margaret, my condolences. Gerald was an excellent employee, very competent, very responsible." "Mr. Manuel, how long had you known my husband?" "Ah, let me see. He started here in 1967, so about 6 years." "Do you know where he came from before working here?" Mr. Manuel scratched his head. "Look, he said he'd worked in Albany at an accounting office there, but I don't remember the name." "Why, Mrs. Margaret?" "Just curiosity." I lied. I didn't want anyone to think I was suspicious of my own dead husband. I went home without answers. Albany. Could it be true? Had he really worked there? Or was it another lie? The months went by, turned into years, Paul and Rita growing up, my sewing routine, bills to pay, laundry to wash, food to make. Life doesn't stop, right? No matter how much we're suffering, the world keeps turning, the kids keep getting hungry, the rent keeps coming due. So we swallow the pain and keep going. In 1975, 2 years after his death, Paul made his first communion. Rita was jealous. She wanted to do it too, but she was still too young. I sewed Paul's little white outfit, threw a simple party at home, invited my family, looked at my son in his white suit, all dressed up, and thought, Gerald should be here to see this. And along with that thought came anger. Anger that he died so young. Anger that he kept secrets. Anger that I was alone. There was a time in 1976 that I almost gave up on discovering anything. I thought, why dig into the past? He died, it's over, let it be. But I couldn't. It was stronger than me. Every time I saw a brunette woman in a blue dress on the street, my heart would race. I'd stare, trying to see if it was her, but it never was. Once, in 1977, I was on the bus coming back from downtown, where I'd gone to buy sewing thread. A brunette woman got on, in her mid-40s, hair pulled back. She sat near me. I kept looking out of the corner of my eye. Could it be her? After 4 years, would I recognize her? I worked up the courage and asked, "Excuse me for bothering you, but have you ever lived here in Forest Hills?" The woman looked at me with a startled face. "No, ma'am. I've always lived in Astoria. Why?" Nothing. I thought I knew you from somewhere." She thought I was strange, stayed quiet the rest of the way, and I felt ridiculous. I was looking for a ghost. The 1980s arrived. Paul became a teenager, started giving trouble like every boy that age does. He wanted to go out with friends, play ball until late. He started noticing girls. Rita was becoming a young woman, starting to dress up, to worry about clothes, about hair. I continued at my sewing machine, but now I also made dresses to order, not just repairs. The income improved a bit. In 1982, I managed to buy a television, a used TV, black and white, but it worked fine. The kids were so happy. Now they could watch soap operas, football, variety shows. I liked it too, I confess. After a whole day of work, sitting on the couch and watching a little soap opera was my rest moment. But you know what happened? Sometimes some scene would play in the soap opera, some character with a secret, some revelation from the past. And I'd think of Gerald, think of his secret. And that wound I thought was healing would open up again. There was a year, I think it was 1984, that I went to the records office to try to get some old certificate of Gerald's, birth certificate, something. The lady at the office looked, and didn't find anything in his name, born in New York. She asked me to come back another day, that she'd look better. I came back 3 times, nothing. It was as if Gerald didn't exist before 1965, before meeting me. That gave me chills. What do you mean? There was no record. Everyone has a birth certificate. Everyone is born somewhere. There's a record, a document. Where was his? I started to suspect that Gerald wasn't his real name. I started to think he'd changed his name. But why? Why would a man change his name? Only if he was running from something or someone. That discovery haunted me for months. I'd look at his photo that I had on the living room side table. Photo from our wedding, him in a dark suit, me in a simple white dress. And I'd ask quietly, "Who were you, Gerald? What was your real name?" But life didn't stop for me to keep tormenting myself. Paul finished high school in 1985. He started working as an office boy at a law firm. Rita was in high school, wanting to do teacher training to become a teacher. I continued sewing, but now my fingers were already full of calluses. My eyesight was starting to strain with the thin thread. My back hurt permanently. We moved in 1986. The little house where we lived was sold. The owner didn't want to renew the lease. We had to look for another place. We found a tiny apartment in Flushing, 2 bedrooms, living room and kitchen. It was minuscule, but it was cheaper than a house and had the advantage of being in a more secure building. At that time, New York was already getting violent, mugging everywhere. We had to protect ourselves. During the move, When I was packing things, I found an old shoebox on top of the closet. It was a box that had belonged to Gerald. I recognized it because it had the name of the shoe store written on the lid. I opened it, expecting to find old shoes, but inside there were some photos. 3 black and white photos, small. Those 3x4 photos. I picked up the photos with my hand shaking. They were photos of a young man, about 25, 26 years old, black hair, no mustache yet, no glasses, but it was him. It was Gerald, or whoever he was. I turned the photos over looking for some note on the back. Nothing, just the photos. I looked at those photos and cried. I cried because that young man in the photo had become my husband, had slept beside me for 8 years, had given me 2 children, and I knew nothing about him. Nothing at all. I kept the photos with me. I put them inside my Bible, between the pages of Psalms. I'd look at them from time to time, as if by looking at that photo, I'd discover who he was. Rita graduated as a teacher in 1988. She started teaching at a public school. Paul had become an administrative assistant at the law firm. He was earning reasonably well. They started helping at home, lightening my burden. I still sewed, but not with that craziness from before. I could rest a bit more. We found out in 1989 that Paul was dating. The girlfriend was a nice girl, Helen, daughter of a shopkeeper. He brought her home to meet us. They got engaged the following year. They got married in 1991. I became a mother-in-law at 49 years old. Rita also found a boyfriend, George, a math teacher from the school where she worked. They got married in 1992. In less than 2 years, my 2 children had left home, started families. I was left alone in the Flushing apartment. Alone, but not lonely. They came to visit me every week. Helen got pregnant quickly, gave me my first grandson in 1992, little Peter. I became a grandmother. What joy, my God! Holding that little baby in my arms, seeing him opening his little eyes, was like receiving a second chance to live. But you know what I thought when I held my grandson? I thought that Gerald had lost all this. He'd lost seeing his children grow up, get married, have children. He'd died at 42 years old with a secret so terrible it killed him. And I thought, could there be somewhere another grandmother holding a grandchild and thinking of the son that Gerald could have been? Could there be a family he abandoned? Because I'd already reached that conclusion over the years. Gerald had another life before me. He'd changed his name. He'd run from something. And that woman in the blue dress knew it. She knew him from the past. And when they saw each other that day, after so many years, the shock was so great that his heart couldn't take it. But who was that woman? What had Gerald done? What was the secret? In 1993, I was already 51 years old. I no longer had that burning hope of discovering the truth. I'd kind of come to terms with it. I thought I'd die without knowing, that I'd take that doubt to the grave with me. It was on an afternoon in September, a Thursday. I remember because I'd gone to the supermarket in the morning and was putting away the groceries when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was a brunette woman, graying hair, pulled back in a bun, simple brown dress, about 60-something years old, maybe. I opened the door with the chain still on for security. Yes? The woman looked at me, and in that instant I knew. I don't know how, but I knew. 20 years I had waited, and she had finally come. Are you Margaret, widow of Gerald? My heart raced. I am. Who are you, ma'am? She took a deep breath. She was nervous. I could see it from her trembling hands. My name is Clara. I need to talk to you about your late husband, about who he really was. I took off the chain, opened the door. Come in. She came in slowly, looking around as if she was looking for something or afraid of something. She sat on the couch when I indicated. I sat in the armchair across from her, my hands sweating cold. Would you like a glass of water? I asked, more out of automatic politeness than really caring about her thirst. I wanted her to talk already. No, thank you. She took a deep breath again. Mrs. Margaret, it took me 20 years to gather the courage to come here. 20 years thinking whether I should or shouldn't. But now I need to speak. I need someone to know the truth. And you have the right to know who the man you married was." "I know who he was," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even with my heart wanting to jump out of my mouth. "He was my husband, father of my children." "No, Mrs. Margaret." She looked me in the eyes, and what I saw in those eyes was pain. Old pain, deep, that had become a scar, but had never really healed. "You don't know. Nobody knew. Only me and my daughter." Then she started to tell, and the world collapsed for the second time in my life. Clara stared at me in silence for a few seconds. I could see she was fighting an internal battle, deciding where to start, how to tell a story she'd kept for so long. Her hands trembled in her lap. She intertwined her fingers, squeezed as if she was holding herself together so she wouldn't fall apart. "Mrs. Margaret, your husband wasn't called Gerald," she began, and those words fell in the room like a bomb. "His real name was Harold Ferguson. He was born in Rochester, upstate New York, in 1931. I was paralyzed. Harold. His real name was Harold. What I already suspected was confirmed there, in the mouth of that woman I didn't know." "How do you know this?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out weak. "Because I met him in 1954. I was 22 years old, he was 23, and we were engaged, Mrs. Margaret." The floor disappeared from under my feet. Engaged. That woman had been engaged to my husband before me, long before me. "I worked as a sales clerk in a fabric store in downtown Rochester," she continued, her voice starting to fail. "My family was poor, very poor. My father was a factory worker, my mother a laundress. I was the oldest of 5 siblings. I started working at 14 to help at home. When I turned 18, I got the job at the fabric store. It was a good job for a girl like me, you know. I earned regularly every month. I worked indoors, not in the heat, not in a factory." She paused, swallowed hard. I didn't say anything, just waited. "Harold, he showed up at the store in June 1954. He came to buy fabric for his mother to make a tablecloth. He was a handsome young man, well-dressed, polite. He'd studied through junior year of high school, which for that time was a lot. He worked in an accounting office, was an apprentice accountant. We talked a bit there at the counter. He was nice. He came back to the store the next week. This time he didn't buy anything, just came to talk to me." I could imagine the scene. A young man interested in a pretty girl. Things were like that back then. Dating started slowly, with respect, with conversation at the store door, at the house gate. "He started picking me up after work," Clara continued. "Every day at 6 in the evening, he was there at the store door waiting for me. We'd talk on the way to my house. My parents liked him. A hard-working young man with a profession, respectful. After 3 months, he asked my father to date me. Serious dating, the kind to get married, my father accepted." She smiled a little, but it was a sad smile, one of those smiles that hurt more than crying. "We dated for a year. It was a happy year, Mrs. Margaret. Harold was attentive, affectionate in his way, kind of serious, but affectionate. He'd bring flowers, take me for walks in the park on Sundays, talk about getting married, having our own house, children. I dreamed of that. I dreamed of being a housewife, having my children, my family. That was all a girl wanted back then. I knew exactly how she felt. I'd also had those dreams. I'd also believed I'd have a happy family, a peaceful life. In August 1955, we got officially engaged. He gave me a silver ring with a little red stone. It wasn't gold, it wasn't a diamond, but to me it was the most beautiful ring in the world. She stopped, her eyes welling up. We scheduled the wedding for May 1956. It was going to be at St. Patrick's Church in Rochester. A simple party at my parents' house. I was already saving money to buy fabric and make my wedding dress. She took a deep breath, wiped the tears with the back of her hand. But in October 1955, I discovered I was expecting a baby. Ah, there it was. The explanation was starting to form in my head. A pregnancy before marriage. Back then, That was a tremendous scandal. I was terrified, Mrs. Margaret, terrified because we shouldn't have done that before getting married. But it happened just once, and I got pregnant. She was crying now, tears running down her aged face. I told him. I thought he was going to be angry, that he was going to yell at me, I don't know. But no. He got serious, thought for a bit, and said we'd move up the wedding. We'd get married in December, before my belly started to show. Nobody needed to know that the baby had been made before. And your parents? I asked. I didn't tell them. Harold said not to tell. He said that when we got married, then yes, I'd tell. I'd say I got pregnant right after the wedding on the honeymoon. Back then, many women got pregnant quickly anyway, so nobody would suspect. And what happened? Clara closed her eyes. The pain on her face was physical, as if each word cost a piece of her soul. November. End of November. I was 3 months pregnant. My belly wasn't showing yet, but I was already feeling nausea, tiredness. Harold had disappeared for 3 days. He didn't show up to pick me up from work, didn't send word, nothing. I got worried. I thought he'd gotten sick. I went to his house, to the boarding house where he lived. He wasn't from Rochester. He'd come from a smaller town nearby and lived in a boarding house downtown. The landlady said he'd left on Monday morning with a suitcase. She said he was traveling for work. He didn't come back Tuesday, didn't come back Wednesday, didn't come back Thursday. On Friday, I went to the accounting office where he worked. The boss told me Harold had quit on Monday, just like that. Said he'd gotten a better job in another city and was leaving. My God. He'd run away. He just packed his bags and ran away. I waited a week. Clara continued, her voice increasingly choked. A week thinking he'd come back, that he'd send a letter explaining, that he'd come get me, but nothing came, nothing. He'd disappeared, evaporated, as if he'd never existed. I had to tell my parents. My mother cried. My father wanted to kill me, literally wanted to kill me. He took the belt and beat me until I bled. Said I'd shamed the family, that I was shameless, a lost woman. My mother begged him not to kick me out of the house, but he kicked me out anyway. Said he didn't want a dishonored daughter under his roof. I put my hand to my chest. That story was heartbreaking. A 22-year-old girl, pregnant, abandoned by her fiancé, kicked out of the house by her parents. I went to live with an aunt, my mother's sister, who was a widow and lived alone in a shack on the outskirts of Rochester. She accepted me, thank God, but I had to quit my job at the store because when the pregnancy started to show, the store owner fired me. She said she didn't want an unmarried pregnant girl working there, that it was a bad example for the other employees. I had no money. My aunt worked washing clothes for others, and I helped as I could, but pregnant it was difficult. We went hungry, Mrs. Margaret. We'd eat once a day, sometimes not even that. I begged my mother to help me. She'd come in secret from my father to bring a little food, some old clothes, but it was little, it was very little. She was sobbing. Now I got up, went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, gave it to her. She drank, thanked me, tried to calm down. The baby was born in May 1956, exactly the month I should have been getting married. My aunt called a midwife because I had no money for a hospital. It was a difficult birth, long. The baby was born at dawn, a tiny little girl, skinny, but she was born alive. She cried. I named her Sarah because I liked that name. Thought it was beautiful, and also because it was the name of a character who suffered a lot, just like I was suffering. Sarah, the girl that Gerald, Harold had mentioned before fainting. The girl was right about me. But soon I noticed something was wrong with Sarah. Clara continued. She didn't move her little legs right, didn't move her little arms, was very limp, very still. The midwife said it was normal, that newborn babies were like that, but I felt it wasn't. At 2 months, I took her to a health clinic. The doctor examined her, did some tests, and gave me the news. Sarah had severe cerebral palsy. She would never walk, would never talk properly, would need special care her whole life. I put my hand over my mouth. A child with cerebral palsy back then, without resources, without money, without structure, was a sentence of suffering. Mrs. Margaret, I won't lie to you. There were days I wanted to die, wanted to throw myself in the river with Sarah in my arms and end that suffering. But I didn't have the courage. I'd look at that little face of hers, at those little eyes that looked at me even without understanding anything. And I couldn't. She was my daughter. I had to take care of her. And I did. I took care of her for 20 years. I worked as a laundress, as a cleaning lady, anything that came up. I'd carry Sarah on my back, tied in a cloth while I washed clothes at the laundromat. I'd sleep 3-4 hours a night because she didn't sleep right. She'd get agitated, crying. My aunt helped me until she died in 1963. After that, I was really alone. Sarah grew up, but stayed the size of a child, skinny, weak, didn't talk, just made sounds, didn't walk. I had to carry her everywhere, feed her by mouth, change diapers, give her a bath, everything her whole life. Clara stopped talking, stared at her own hands, those hands worn from so much work. And then that day came, March 1973. I was living in New York for about 2 years. I'd come here because in Rochester there was no more work. The situation was difficult. I came to try life in the city. I got a little room in a tenement in Forest Hills near Queens Boulevard. I worked as a day worker in family homes. I'd leave Sarah locked in the room when I went to work. There was no other way. That Saturday, I'd gone to visit a cousin who lived a few blocks from there. I was walking back home. When I was crossing Queens Boulevard, I looked to the other side of the street and I saw him. Harold, after 18 years, he was older, with glasses, with a mustache. But it was him. I recognized right away that face, those eyes, that way of walking. It was him. He was with a woman beside him who I later discovered was you, and the two were carrying shopping bags. He saw me too. Our eyes met, and I saw. I saw the recognition. I saw the panic. I saw the fear. He turned white, stopped walking, and then he fell. I was paralyzed, Mrs. Margaret. I stood there, unable to move, seeing the confusion that formed. You screaming, people running, ambulance arriving. I should have gone over there, should have talked to you, told everything right there, but I couldn't. I was afraid. Afraid of what? I don't even know. I just know I turned my back and left. I found out later, from a neighbor who knew people from your neighborhood, that Harold had survived, but was very ill. And months later, I found out he'd died. And you know what I felt? Nothing. I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel sad. I felt relief. Relief because he'd died without ever having known Sarah, without ever having had to face what he'd done, without ever having taken responsibility. Clara looked me in the eyes, and what I saw there was a pain so old, so deep, that it seemed to have no end. 2 years later, in 1975, Sarah died. Pneumonia. She was always weak. Any illness hit her hard. I took her to the hospital. They admitted her. Did what they could, but it didn't help. She was 19 years old when she died. She spent 19 years in this world suffering, and her father never, ever wanted to know about her. Mrs. Margaret, I know you're not to blame for any of this. I know you were deceived just like me, but I needed to tell. I needed someone to know the truth. That Harold or Gerald, or whatever name he used, was a coward. A coward who abandoned a pregnant girl, who ran from responsibility, who left a defenseless child suffering her whole life without a father, without help, without anything. That phrase he said before fainting, that you told me years later when we met again. The girl was right about me. It was about Sarah. She was right. Right, that her father was a coward, a man without character, a man who was worthless. The silence that fell in the room was heavy, suffocating. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to feel. It was anger, it was sadness, it was disappointment, it was everything at once. I had loved that man, had slept beside him for 8 years, had made 2 children with him, and he was a liar, a fugitive, a coward who had abandoned a pregnant woman and a sick daughter. Why did you wait 20 years to tell me this? I finally asked. Because I was afraid, Clara answered. Afraid of reliving all that. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid you'd blame me, I don't know. And also because while Sarah was alive, I had to concentrate on taking care of her. I didn't have time or energy to keep messing with the past. But after she died, this weight stayed in me. This weight of being the only person in the world who knew the truth. And a few months ago, I decided I needed to share this weight. I needed someone else to know. I looked for you. It took a while, but I managed to find out where you lived. And I came, because you had the right to know who you married. You had the right to know that your children have a sister who died without ever knowing them. You had the right to know the truth. I sat there, looking at that woman, trying to process everything. 20 years of questions, 20 years of doubts, and now all the answers at once. And each answer was worse than the doubt. Gerald wasn't who I thought he was. Never was. He was Harold, a man who'd run from the past, changed his name, built a new life on top of lies. And when the past found him, the shock was so great, it killed him. Do you have any photo of her? I asked, my voice coming out in a whisper. Of Sarah. Clara rummaged in her purse, took out an old leather wallet, worn, opened it, took out a small photo, yellowed, handed it to me. I looked at the photo. It was a girl of about 10, 12 years old, skinny, short hair, sitting in an improvised wheelchair, looking at the camera with big, deep eyes. She wasn't smiling, just looking. And I saw in those eyes. I saw the suffering, I saw the innocence, I saw a life that never had a chance. That was my children's half-sister. That girl had the same father as Paul and Rita. And I never knew. They never knew. Nobody ever knew. I started to cry. I cried for that girl who suffered her whole life. I cried for Clara, who carried a burden alone for decades. I cried for myself, for having loved a man who didn't deserve it. I cried for my children who had a sister and could never meet her. Clara cried with me. 2 women sitting in a small apartment room crying over the same man. One he abandoned, the other he deceived, both victims of his cowardice. After Clara left my apartment that afternoon, I sat on the couch for hours. I didn't move, didn't turn on the light when it got dark. I stayed there alone in the dark, holding that photo of Sarah, trying to understand how my life had turned upside down in a matter of minutes. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. Every moment I'd considered happy, every good memory, every time I'd defended Gerald's memory to my children, saying their father was a good man, hard-working, honest, everything was built on top of a farce. I'd slept next to a liar for 8 years. I'd made children with a man who'd already abandoned another daughter. I'd cried over his death. I'd kept mourning. I'd defended his memory, and he didn't deserve any of it, nothing. When I looked at the clock, it was already almost midnight. I got up from the couch, went to the bedroom, lay on the bed without taking off my clothes. I lay staring at the ceiling, at the darkness, with thousands of thoughts going through my head. Should I tell my children? Should I destroy the image they had of their father? Paul was 26 years old. Rita was 24. Both were adults, had their lives, their families. Why throw this bomb on them? Why make them suffer for something that happened before they were born? But at the same time, they had a right to know the truth. They had a right to know that there was a sister of theirs who died, who suffered. They had a right to know who their father really was. I spent the whole night awake, tossing from one side to the other, those questions tormenting me. When the sun came up, I still didn't have an answer. On Saturday, Paul came to visit me with Helen and little Peter. They arrived mid-morning, happy, bringing fresh bread from the bakery to have coffee with me. Peter, a year old, was starting to take his first steps, holding onto the furniture. I held him in my lap, smelled that baby smell, that soft skin, and thought, Sarah could never do this, never took her first steps, never played, never had a normal childhood. Mom, are you okay? You look tired, Helen commented, worried. I didn't sleep very well, that's all. I lied. I was already getting good at lying. I learned from the best, after all. You need to take care of your health, Mom. You can't keep working yourself to death, Paul said with that protective way he developed after becoming a father. I looked at my son. That 26-year-old man, tall, strong, hard-working, similar to his father in his facial features, in his serious way of being. Did he have the right to know that the father he admired so much was a coward? That he'd abandoned a pregnant woman, that he had a daughter who died without ever knowing him? I didn't tell that day. I didn't have the courage. Rita showed up on Sunday with George. She was starting to get a little chubby. I thought it was just food, but she told me the news. She was 3 months pregnant. She was going to give me another grandchild. I was happy for her. I hugged her, congratulated her.